Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I see a number of familiar faces. So let's just get a quick show of hands. How many of you have I met before? You've been in one of our difficult conversation sessions. Okay, look around and identify those people. I want you guys to know I'm here because Linda called and said you needed a remedial course. Okay, somehow you didn't get it the first time, so we're going to cover a little bit of it today. So I have been with the Harvard Negotiation Project for 20 years. And what I wanted to talk a little bit about in the short time we have this morning is the role of difficult conversations in leadership, particularly in changing times. Now, I come at leadership from a particular vantage point, as you can imagine, and I really think of leadership as negotiation. By the way, teaching is also a negotiation. Speaking up here is a negotiation. Every day you are negotiating for credibility, for trust, for people's willingness to stay the course, to be persistent in trying to solve hard problems, for being willing to reach out to collaborate with someone, which means adapting how we do things to get in sync with someone else. It means letting go of the way that we often do it and know works to try something we're actually not sure is going to work. And in order to do that, you need skills in influence and persuasion. Now, I teach at a law school. What do we teach people in law school? Okay, the real answer is nothing. But ostensibly, what we're teaching them in law school is advocacy, how to look at the evidence, how to put together tight, sound reasoning, and to persuade a judge or a jury or the other side in a dispute to settle things our way. And all of you, in your education, whatever education you had training in persuasion skills. And I'm here to tell you, actually, when we get to this level of leadership, when you step into the real world and you're leading human beings, this is totally inadequate. So we prepare people to go out and use these skills, and what we don't tell them is that particularly when the stakes are high, when the topics and the issues are complex, when there's strong disagreement in the room, this equation is actually much more complicated. And that all of your fantastic persuasive skills, your logical reasoning, is actually undercut by very real human resistance. Now, what I see people do is to try to win this equation by pushing harder and piling on the top. And what I'm going to suggest to you is that the most powerful place you can put your attention and your skills is in engaging the denominator, engaging human resistance. Now, let me tell you a little bit about what I mean by resistance. And to understand resistance, I learned the most about it really from dealing with my boss. Maybe you have the same experience. So I've been working for 20 years with this guy, Roger Fisher. And to understand Roger, I think you really have to understand his service in World War II. Roger was a weatherman. Remember back during World War II, we didn't have weather satellites, didn't have the Weather Channel, didn't have that weather app on your iPhone. So how do you find out what the weather's like so you know whether you can send up a squadron of bombers? You have to go outside and look. So Roger would climb into the nose, usually of a B-17, big glass nose. They'd fly him up over Germany. Later they switched him to the Pacific, up over Japan. He'd look around, see how the weather is, radio back, let him know whether they can send out the bombers. Now, both sides are doing this, and the weather plane is typically accompanied by just a couple of bombers, just to fly cover for them. And while they're up there over Germany and Japan checking out the weather, might as well drop a couple of bombs. I mean, what the heck, we're already here. As a result of that, they get shot at, of course. The bombers are being shot at, but incidentally, the weather plane is being shot at. Now, I'm guessing that some of you have actually been inside the nose of a B-17, and so you understand just what an impressive view you actually have of people shooting at you. And Roger quickly decided that although he loved being a weatherman, being shot at was really not his favorite part of this job. Maybe in contrast to Rourke, right, who seems to thrive on it, Roger decided, I need to see if I can do something about this getting shot at business. So he goes to his commanding officer, and he persuades him that the only reason I'm getting shot at up there is because of the company I'm keeping. Why don't you send up the weather plane alone? It'll take a couple rounds for the other side to catch on, but pretty soon they'll understand it's just the weather plane, nothing to worry about. So he persuades his commanding officer, who agrees to try it as an experiment. It works beautifully. Soon Roger's going up, quietly, unmolested, radioing back the weather, being ignored. Big success. The problem is, this is one of the reasons why the Enola Gay was able to get up over Japan alone and drop the bomb without the Japanese ever even hitting the air raid sirens, because they'd gotten used to the weather plane flying alone. And they'd gotten used to that not being a threat. Roger came home from the war and discovered that of the 6 freshmen who had started college together and stopped out to go to war, he was the only one who came home. And this experience really motivated the rest of his life. He dedicated his life to trying to find better ways for people to work through their differences. He finished college and law school as quickly as he could. He turned down a Supreme Court clerkship with learned hand to hop a boat for Europe to go work on the Marshall Plan. Eventually, he made his way back to Harvard, where he started teaching on international relations, later negotiation. He kept his foot in the real world, helping try to manage some of the world's toughest problems. He was involved behind the scenes in the SALT talks, settled the Sinai, border disputes in Peru and Ecuador, et cetera. He spoke often on TV and in public forums. He founded the Harvard Negotiation Project and wrote a book called Getting to Yes. How many people here have read Getting to Yes? Okay, that was 1979. This book sells 500,000 copies a year in North America alone. It's in 37 languages. It's quickly become a foundation book in the field of negotiation and conflict resolution. Today, classes are taught all over the world using this approach. Now, I had the privilege of working with Roger alongside him for almost 20 years. Oh, by the way, I know what you're thinking. Yes, it's true, I was 12 at the time I started. And apparently friends with Dorothy Hamill. Did anyone else have this haircut? I gotta find those green jeans, they're really something else. So I come on board, and Roger and I are teaching negotiation. People are coming to our courses. We're giving them all these different approaches, not just look at the evidence and the reasoning, but look beyond people's demands to their underlying interests, create options, use criteria to decide what's fair, et cetera. Things are going swimmingly. People are coming, taking the courses, going off. Periodically, they come back to us and say, hey, that approach you gave me, let me tell you a little bit about how I'm using it. It really unlocked this big union dispute, helped settle the following conflict. But every once in a while, people were coming back and saying, you know, that approach you taught me, it's working in a lot of great ways, but I have to tell you, there are some situations where when I try to use your approach, it's not working. In fact, when I try to follow your advice, I think maybe it's making the situation worse. Now, Harvard being Harvard, we had a reaction that was perhaps typical, which was, well, if our theory isn't working for you, there's obviously something wrong with you, right? I mean, maybe you need that remedial course. Certainly, you have to hire us as consultants, and we'll come in and show you how it's really done. But eventually, I think we came to our senses and thought, well, maybe there's something different about particularly challenging conversations. And I started working on what became the book Difficult Conversations, and Roger, who, by the way, was retired at this point, the law school forced him to retire. He signed the paperwork and then proceeded to completely ignore it. He still came in every morning, picked up the newspaper, opened it, started working on a problem, started faxing his advice off to people. You know, people in South Africa are getting these faxes from some guy named Roger with advice for them. So Roger decides what he needs to understand is the role of emotion in working relationships? And why is it that all of these persuasive skills and tools weren't working? Now, by his own description, Roger would say feelings aren't really his thing. All that touchy-feely stuff. But of course, that means, true to form, he decided he needed to write a book about it because that would force him to learn about it. So he teams up with this guy, Dan Shapiro. A couple of years go by, and they've got a manuscript. And Roger comes to me and says, could you read this and come in and give us some feedback on it? So here's what they've come up with. What they've identified are 5 core emotional interests in all working relationships. And if these emotional interests get stepped on, you get that resistance reaction. You get friction and trouble in the relationship. And that's what undercuts persuasion. Here are the 5 core emotional interests. Autonomy. Autonomy is I get to decide and control what I get to decide and control. Now, if you're the lowest person on the totem pole in an organization, everybody else can tell you what to do. But they can't tell you what to think. So you'll hear people protect the autonomy of their views, their internal voice and their opinion, by saying, well, you know, I'll follow the policy, I'll toe the line, but I'm not going to tell you this is a good idea. This is a stupid idea. As we all move up in organizations, our sense of autonomy expands. No. You don't get to decide that. I get to decide that, right? And turf wars are often fights over autonomy. Second is affiliation. Am I in or am I out? Am I connected? Do I belong? Do I get CC'd on the email? Am I in the loop? I heard Rourke's comment about the culture of the special forces and the SEALs and the concern about women entering that group as an open question about affiliation. Right now, there is a very tight connection for who's in and how we protect each other and take care of each other. And that's so important. He's worried about risking it. Fair enough. What's interesting is that all of us in daily life are determining whether we're in or out in the ways that matter to us. Let's imagine you suddenly discover that there's a meeting going on down the hall. And your sense is you should probably be there. So why weren't you invited? How many people would be somewhat distracted by this as you're trying to proceed through your day? Okay, let me remind you, you don't even actually want to go to the meeting. Okay, it's probably boring and you have too much on your plate already, and yet that sense of being left out matters.